would never have believed it if I had not witnessed the plague myself. A brilliant day was ruined when the locusts arrived. They struck without warning. Nothing had prepared our tiny God-fearing farming community for the horror which descended upon us as we toiled and labored hard in our fields. My name is Amos. I have always been a polite and introspective man, grounded by the wind at my back, the rich soil between my fingers, and the firm earth beneath my feet. The Almighty guides my hand, and this is my story. Our leader, Father Jedediah, often tells me that I am gifted and respects me as a man of empathy and strong insight. This is my solemn testimony. Our leader. The day had begun, as normally as any other. We awoke early, gathered in the large dining hall to give grace and prepared for the day ahead. The men and boys dressed in their working clothes, long-sleeved shirts, long trousers, and wide-brimmed hats. Wore their long, floral-patterned dresses and bonnets. We were a proud community, hard-working and devoted. While we shunned most modern conveniences, we were not completely isolated from the world, nor were we engaged in anything sinister ourselves. Our purpose was to live and laugh together in the service of the Almighty, striving to provide happiness and enlightenment to our people. As we began our work in the fields, tending to the corn crops that sustained our community, the sky was clear, and the air was filled with the promise of a fruitful day. But that promise was swiftly shattered. Without any warning, the locusts arrived. A dark cloud appeared on the horizon, moving swiftly and growing larger as it approached. We squinted at the sky, hoping it was just a passing storm, but the truth became clear all too quickly. These were no ordinary locusts. They were huge, easily the full body length of a man, and just as wide, their brown-green bodies glistening ominously in the sunlight. Their writhing multitude brought darkness with them as they blotted out the sun, casting the cornfields into deep, foreboding shadow and gloom. A thick, suffocating silence fell over us, broken only by the eerie rustling of their wings and the distant hum of their approach. Jedediah, always the pillar of strength and leadership, quickly directed the menfolk to take action. We grabbed our farming implements and tried in vain to distract the creatures, raising our voices in desperate cries to drive them away. The women retreated to the houses, their prayers rising like incense to the heavens, as they begged for deliverance from this evil calamity. But our efforts were futile. The locusts swarmed everywhere, overwhelming us with their sheer numbers. Their powerful mandibles chewed and munched through our corn crops, shredding them as they devoured every plant in their path. The sound of their feeding was a terrifying symphony, a cacophony of destruction that echoed across the fields and into our very souls. To seek refuge. The men ran to the houses, slamming doors and barricading ourselves inside as the swarm descended upon our homes. The noise was unbearable. The hum and buzz of their wings as they flew outside our homes, the scraping of their bodies against our corrugated iron roofs, and the relentless thumping against the walls and doors. It felt as though the very walls would give way, that the locusts would break in and consume us, just as they had our crops. In desperation, and they stare. The women whispered prayers through trembling lips, while the men exchanged worried glances. Each of us silently asking the same question: how much longer could we endure that? It felt like an eternity. Time seemed to stretch and bend as the swarm raged outside, the oppressive darkness of their bodies blotting out all light. We could hear the cries of the children, the whispered reassurances of the mothers, and the occasional muttered prayer from the men. The locusts were relentless, and there was nothing we could do but wait and hope that the Almighty would show mercy and end our suffering. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it ended abruptly. Moved on, leaving behind the scene of devastation. We hesitated, listening in disbelief as the noise faded and the light slowly returned. When we finally dared to venture outside, we were met with a sight that broke our hearts. The fields were bare, stripped of every green leaf, every stalk of corn. The crops that had promised a bountiful harvest were gone, leaving nothing but desolation in their wake. That followed was even more oppressive than the noise of the swarm. We stood there, stunned, unable to comprehend the full extent of our loss. Father Jedediah was the first to speak, his voice trembling with emotion. He reminded us that while our crops were gone, our faith remained. We had survived the plague, and now we must rebuild, trusting in the Almighty to guide us through this trial. As I stood there, surveying the ruined fields, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of curiosity. The locusts had been unlike anything I had ever seen. Larger, more fearsome, almost otherworldly in their power. I knew that this was no ordinary event, no mere act of nature. It was a test, a trial of our faith and our resolve. This is my testimony. My solemn account of the day. The locust came. A day when we reminded of the fragility of our existence and the strength of our faith. We were shaken, but we were not broken. We vowed to rebuild, and we were determined to continue to live and laugh together in the service of the Almighty, trusting in His wisdom and mercy to see us through. Whatever trials may come. The silence that ensued stunned me. It was so quiet in comparison to the cacophony and din we had been forced to endure just moments before. As we cautiously emerged from our homes, the sun shone brightly as it had before the devastation began, almost mocking us with its untroubled light. We looked to our fields with a desperate hope that something salvageable remained. But there was nothing left intact. I was sickened. The cornfields, once lush and brimming with promise, had been reduced to mere stubble with winter fast approaching. We had relied on the corn harvest to sustain us. Now, what could we do? The dread of starvation loomed over us like a dark cloud, threatening to suffocate the last vestiges of hope. We stared at each other, scarcely able to believe that such destruction had been visited upon us. What on earth had we done to anger God? Among us who knew the answer. We were rendered helpless as we attempted to comprehend the full scale of our loss. The fields, our lifeblood, had been decimated in what felt like an instant. For the majority of us, there was shock and heartbreak. Some among us fell to their knees, their faces etched with despair, but others reacted differently. Where sorrow dominated, some anger and bitter recrimination found a foothold in others. Voices, once united in prayer and song, now rose in accusations. Some pointed fingers accusing others of committing terrible sins and casting unfounded blame for the calamity. Brother turned against brother, and the unity that had always been our strength began to fray at the seams. Daughters wept and wailed, their tears a painful reminder of our shared grief. The children were frightened, their innocent minds unable to grasp the magnitude of what had transpired. The harmony that had held firm in our community for so long was now evidently twisted and unwinding. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat a painful reminder of the fear and uncertainty that gripped me. My temples ached with the weight of our collective despair. I ground my teeth, bit my lip, and held my tongue, clinging firm to my teachings and my faith. Yet inwardly I retreated, lost in fear for what would happen next. Was this an act of divine punishment, or was it intended by God to be our test? The question swirled in my mind, each more troubling than the last. In the wake of the destruction, the community faced the prospect of hunger and ruin. The once hopeful atmosphere that had pervaded our village was now thick with anxiety and fear. Father Jedediah, ever the voice of reason and authority, stood up and called for calm. His voice, though steady, carried a weight of sadness that we all felt. He offered soothing words of comfort, reminding us that we were still a community bound together by our faith. He encouraged us to gather together to pray for divine intervention, hoping for a miracle that would see us through this dark time. Despite my growing doubts, I joined them. The air was thick with the scent of fear and desperation. But there was also a thread of hope, fragile though it was. We gathered in the church, the one place that still felt whole and safe. The wooden pews creaked under the weight of our weary bodies as we knelt in unison, our voices rising in a chorus of pleading and supplication. We implored the Almighty for His help and generous aid, our words filled with the fervor of those who have nothing left to lose. As we prayed, I couldn't help but feel the weight of my own doubts. Was God listening? Did He hear our cries? Or were we being tested, our faith and resilience pushed to their very limits? I knew that others felt the same, that faces a mix of hope and fear. The locusts had taken more than just our crops. They had shaken our faith to its core. But as I knelt there, surrounded by my community, I realized that we were not alone in our suffering. We still had each other, and as long as we held on to that, there was still a glimmer of hope. In the days that followed, we worked to rebuild what we could. The fields were beyond saving, but we can still salvage our community, our faith. Father Jedediah led us in daily prayers. His words a constant reminder that while we had faced great loss, we had not been abandoned. We were being tested, and it was up to us to prove that our faith was strong enough to withstand even. There were moments of despair, times when the weight of our situation felt unbearable. But there were also moments of incredible resilience and strength. The community began to pull together, helping each other in whatever ways we could. Some shared what little food they had stored, while others offered comfort and support to those who were struggling the most slowly. The anger and bitterness that had threatened to tear us apart began to dissipate, replaced by a renewed sense of unity and purpose. We had been through a trial by fire, and though we were scarred, we were not broken. The locusts had taken our crops, but they had not taken our spirit. We would survive this, not just through our own efforts, but through the grace and mercy of the Almighty as we continued to pray and work together. I found myself believing once again that we could overcome even the darkest of days. This was our test. And though the road ahead was uncertain, we would walk it together, guided by our faith and the strength of our community. Our fears had gripped us so tightly that we could scarcely sleep that night. The image of our barren fields, stripped of life by the ravenous locusts, haunted our thoughts, and the cold reality of impending starvation weighed heavily on our hearts. Yet, when we awoke the following morning, the cries of despair we had anticipated were instead replaced by cries of joy. Tears flowed freely from our eyes as the truth of what had transpired settled upon us. A miracle had occurred. We had been blessed with a stroke of divine fortune so extraordinary that it left us breathless. Everything we had lost had grown back overnight, only bigger and better than before. The transformation was so astonishing that we pinched ourselves to ensure we were not still dreaming. The barren earth and gnawed stumps that had defined our fields just the day before had been fully replenished with bountiful quantities of lush, ripe corn. The fields were green and plentiful once more, stretching out before us like an oasis in the desert of our despair. We stood there, dumbfounded, our minds struggling to comprehend what our eyes clearly saw. How could this happen? We asked ourselves, how could such devastation be so swiftly and perfectly reversed? There were none among us who could explain the extraordinary phenomenon, but we were united in our gratitude. We had prayed for deliverance, and deliverance had come in a form more wondrous than we could have ever imagined. Hallelujah. Father Jedediah exclaimed, his voice ringing out with fervor. Praise the Lord, for he hath given back tenfold what he hath taken away. His proclamation sparked an ecstatic reaction among us, with shouts of joy and expressions of profound gratitude rising from the gathered farmers. Hands were raised to the heavens, and voices lifted in psalms of praise. Our desperate prayers had been answered. The Almighty had heard our cries for intervention and blessed us beyond measure. Or so we thought. Amid the jubilant celebrations, a significant part of me remained doubtful and uneasy. I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease gnawing at the edges of my mind. The speed and completeness of the recovery were almost too perfect, too sudden. And I found myself questioning whether this was truly the work of divine providence. But I was conflicted. I knew it was wrong to question anything, or to go against the common view of our community, especially in such a time of relief and joy. So, I kept my thoughts to myself, swallowing my suspicions, and forcing a smile as I joined in the celebrations. Yet, as the day wore on, my unease only deepened. I looked to the cornfields, hoping for some reassurance. But instead, I noted an unusual stillness about them. The stalks stood tall and green, the ears of corn heavy with promise. But there was something about the scene that didn't sit right with me. It was as though the fields were holding their breath, waiting for something that I could not see. The sun was warm, and the cloudless sky was bright, both signs that we were still held in good favor. Perhaps I was imagining things I told myself. After all, how often does something good arise from a total disaster? Perhaps this was simply a sign of our faith being rewarded. A divine lesson that even in the darkest times, hope and trust in the Almighty could bring about miracles. But despite my best efforts, the doubts continued to linger in the back of my mind. Some things I realized must remain unspoken. It was not my place to bring unhappiness to our community, not when everyone around me was rejoicing and giving thanks. The new harvest had inspired a renewed devotion among the farmers, their faith strengthened by the miraculous turn of events. Who was I to question what the rest of the community saw as a clear sign of divine intervention? And so, I did my best to push aside my doubts, burying them deep within me as I joined in the celebration. I sang and prayed with the others, my voice blending in with the chorus of thanksgiving. Yet, even as I did, a part of me remained watchful, waiting for the other shoe to drop. There was an unease that I could not shake, a feeling that, despite the bounty that had been restored to us, something was not quite right. The days passed, and the harvest began in earnest. I forced myself to focus on the work at hand, trying to lose myself in the rhythm of the fields and the camaraderie of my fellow farmers. But But the nagging doubts continued to prick at my conscience, a quiet reminder that not all was as it seemed. Whether this miracle was a true blessing or something more ominous, only time would tell. Until then, I would keep my thoughts to myself, hoping that my unease was nothing more than the remnants of the fear and uncertainty that had gripped us all. For now, I would embrace the miracle, pray for its endurance, and trust that whatever the future held, we would face it together as a community. A few days after the miracle that had restored our fields, a new and unsettling event shook our community. Brother Elijah, a man of quiet disposition but keen observation, stumbled upon a horrifying sight in a rocky ravine some 5 miles from our farmland. He returned to us with a flustered account, his voice trembling as he described what he had found. Hundreds of carcasses of locusts, still terrifying in death, their bodies twisted and features grotesque. The community, intrigued and uneasy, gathered quickly to hear his story. The locusts had vanished as mysteriously as they had arrived, and until Elijah's discovery, we had been content to let that mystery remain unsolved. But now, a new curiosity took hold of us, mixed with a deep sense of foreboding. As a group, we decided to follow Elijah to the site and observe firsthand the grisly scene he had described. When we reached the ravine, the air grew heavy with a palpable tension. The landscape was stark and unforgiving, the rocky ground beneath our feet adding to the sense of unease that had begun to settle over us. The sight that greeted us was indeed horrifying. The ground was littered with the bodies of locusts, hundreds of them, their lifeless forms strewn across the rocky terrain as if they had been dropped from the sky. A few days after the miracle that had restored our fields, a few days after the miracle, the sky. approached one of the hapless creatures, cautiously at first, lest the monstrosity lash out or seek to bite or skewer me with one of its sharp, chitinous appendages. But there was no movement, no signs of life. The locusts were truly deceased. As I bent closer, I noticed some unusual features about them. Their size, which had already struck us as abnormal during the swarm, seemed even more grotesque in death. Their large, segmented bodies were contorted, as though they had died in agony. But what disturbed me most were their faces in death. There almost seemed to be a sadness about them. Their bulbous eyes, once reflecting an alien and menacing intelligence, now seemed dull, lifeless, and their once vicious mandibles were set in a strange, almost pitiable frown. It was as if these monstrous creatures, which had brought so much destruction, were now mournful in their final moments. I reached out to touch one of the creatures, and when I did, I noticed something even more unsettling. Instead of the yellow-green ichor one might expect when a bug is squashed, these locusts were oozing a thick red liquid with the consistency of coagulated blood. The sight of it sent a shiver down my spine. This was not normal. This was not something I could easily explain or rationalize. Up until this point, we had been largely unconcerned about where the locusts had gone. In the wake of the miracle that had restored our crops, most of us had simply counted our blessings and carried on with life. Our hearts filled with renewed determination and a firm realization that every day is a blessing granted at the pleasure of the Almighty. The locust's departure had seemed like a divine reprieve, a sign that our prayers had been answered, and we were content to leave it at that. Yet here we were, faced with the undeniable evidence that something more sinister might be at play. Some of the farmers began to murmur among themselves, holding quiet conversations and making their own speculations about what could have killed the locusts. Was this divine intervention a final act of mercy that had saved us from further devastation? Or had the locusts succumbed to natural causes, perhaps consuming something toxic that had led to their gruesome demise? For my part, the discovery deeply unsettled me. There was a sense of dread that I could not shake, a nagging feeling that something was not right in the back of my mind. I began to give serious contemplation to what could have caused these insect marauders such apparent and disfiguring pain. Was this a reckoning from God, a sigh of his power and his will? Or had the locusts eaten something that had poisoned them, leading to their eventual death? could not shake. A nagging feeling that something was not right in the back of my mind. I began to give serious contemplation to what could have caused these insect marauders such apparent and disfiguring pain. Was this a reckoning from God? A sign of His power and His will? Or had the locusts eaten something that had poisoned them, leading to their eventual death? One thought in particular gnawed at me. The pesticides. Before the locusts had descended upon us, we had sprayed the corn with a strong pesticide, hoping to protect our crops from the usual pests. Had this chemical concoction been potent enough to kill the locusts? Had they consumed the tainted corn only to suffer a slow and agonizing death? The red liquid that oozed from their bodies was unlike anything I had ever seen before, and it left me wondering if we had inadvertently played a role in their demise. Troubled by these thoughts, I sought out Father Jedediah, hoping for some clarity. Father Jedediah had always been a source of wisdom and guidance, his faith unwavering even in the face of adversity. I shared my thoughts with him, my voice heavy with the weight of my suspicions. It is God's plan, Brother Amos, he told me, his tone firm and reassuring. The food sustains us and it was not intended for them. The Lord works in mysterious ways and we must trust in His wisdom. The locusts were an abomination sent to test us, and when their purpose was fulfilled, they were cast down, their bodies left to rot as a reminder of the power of the Almighty. His words were meant to comfort me, to reassure me that everything was as it should be. Yet, I couldn't help but feel that something was still amiss. The ease with which we had accepted the miracle, the suddenness of the locust demise, and the gruesome discovery in the ravine all seemed too convenient, too perfectly timed. I wanted to believe that this was God's plan, that we were being cared for and protected by a higher power. But the doubts lingered, a shadow that I could not fully dispel. Over the next few days, life in our community returned to a semblance of normalcy. The farmers busied themselves with the harvest, their spirits lifted by the bounty that had been miraculously restored. The ravine with its disturbing contents was largely forgotten, pushed to the back of our minds as we focused on the work at hand. But for me, the memory of those twisted, lifeless bodies and the questions they raised remained ever present. As I worked alongside my fellow farmers, I found myself constantly glancing towards the fields, half expecting something else to happen. Another sign or another test. My heart was not as light as it once had been, weighed down by the uncertainty of what we had witnessed. The celebration of the miracle had given way to a quiet unease, a sense that we were being watched, judged, perhaps even deceived. And so, I kept my doubts to myself, choosing to move forward with the rest of the community, but always with a wary eye on the horizon. The locusts had come and gone, leaving us with a bounty, but also with a mystery that I feared might never be fully understood. Whether it was divine intervention, natural causes, or something else entirely, I knew that our lives had been irrevocably changed. The fields were green once more, but the shadow of the locust lingered, a reminder that the line between blessing and curse is often thin and easily crossed. In the end, I chose to trust and follow Jedediah's wisdom and the will of the Almighty, but with a heart that remained guarded, always ready for the next trial that might come our way. After all, the miracle had given us back our harvest, but it had also left us with questions that might never be answered, but that would forever shape the way we viewed the world and our place within it. A few weeks later, I began to change. At first, it was subtle, a creeping sense of unease that I struggled to understand. But as time went on, the truth became undeniable, and the horror of what was happening to me and to the rest of the community unfolded before my very eyes. I now know that the community's prayers were indeed answered, but at a terrible, unimaginable cost. After the cornfield harvest was complete, we ate to our heart's content. The bounty was greater than anything we had ever seen, and we thanked the Lord for His blessing. Believing that our faith had been rewarded, we feasted, rejoicing at our good fortune, filling our bellies with the miraculous crops that had sprung up overnight. We were content, blissful even, unaware of the darkness that was beginning to take root within us. But as the old saying goes, ignorance is not bliss. And it wasn't long before the first signs of trouble appeared. It took about a week for the symptoms to manifest initially. It was just a dryness in the mouth, an unquenchable thirst that no amount of water could satisfy. Then came the skin rash, a terrible, itching irritation that spread like wildfire across our bodies. We tried to soothe it with balms and prayers, but nothing seemed to help. The skin began to harden, becoming rough and cracked, like the bark of a dying tree. set in. As more people in the community showed the same symptoms, we were all affected, every single one of us. But the worst was yet to come. One morning, I awoke to an excruciating pain in my back, as if my very bones were being torn apart. I cried out, but my voice was no longer my own. It was higher, sharper, almost inhuman. I could feel something moving beneath my skin, something foreign, something wrong. And then, with a sickening rip, large sores opened up on my back, and from these sores, wings erupted. The horror of the situation became fully apparent to me then, as I realized that I was no longer the man I once was. I was not alone in this. Everyone in the community was undergoing the same transformation. Our once familiar faces became twisted and grotesque, our bodies elongating and hardening into something monstrous. Our speech, once full of prayer and conversation, diminished into high-pitched shrieks and then loud, incessant chirping. It was as if our humanity was being stripped away, layer by layer, until nothing recognizable remained. Our minds, too, were affected. The complexity of human thought gave way to a simpler, more primal consciousness. Madness set in, fueled by an insatiable hunger and an uncontrollable desire to consume everything around us. Plants, trees, grass. Nothing was safe from our ravenous appetites. The lush, green fields that had once been our pride and joy were quickly decimated, leaving only barren earth in our wake. Nothing was safe. From our ravenous green fields that had once been our pride and joy were quickly decimated, leaving only barren earth in our wake. It was a surreal and nightmarish scene. watching the once devout community, men, women, and children alike, transformed into a ravenous swarm. We were no longer a congregation of the faithful. We were a plague preparing to ascend into the sky in search of more food. The instincts that now drove us were alien and terrifying, and I could do nothing to stop them. My human consciousness was fading fast, overwhelmed by the relentless urges that had taken over my body and mind. Yesterday, in one of the last moments of clarity I can remember, we got together as a swarm and took flight. It was a strange sensation, both exhilarating and terrifying, as we flew a few miles to a neighboring farmland. There, we descended upon their cornfields and helped ourselves to the crops, devouring everything in sight. The scene was one of chaos and destruction, and yet there was a twisted sense of satisfaction in it, as if this was what we were meant to do all along. But in these last vestiges of human thought, I am filled with confusion, fear, and a haunting question that gnaws at the remains of my sanity. Was this truly divine punishment, or something even worse? Had we angered God so much that he had turned us into the very plague we once feared? Or was there some other force at work, something darker and more malevolent than I could ever comprehend? What I do know is that I have lost my humanity. I am no longer Amos, the man who once worked the fields and prayed with his neighbors. I am a victim and an instrument of anger, a monstrous creature driven by base instincts and a hunger that can never be sated. I am ashamed of what I have become and aggrieved by what I shall never be again. The transformation is almost complete, and I can feel my thoughts slipping away, replaced by the relentless urge to consume and destroy. I was blind to good reasoning, to the warnings that my own mind tried to give me. And now it is too late. This is judgment, not just on me, but on all of us. We were so eager to accept the miracle, so desperate for salvation, that we failed to see the curse that came with it. And now, we are paying the ultimate price. What I do know is that I have lost my humanity. steals and prey with his neighbors. I am a victim and an instrument of anger, a monstrous creature driven by base instincts and a hunger that can never be sated. I am a shade of what I have become and aggrieved by what I shall never be again. The transformation is almost complete, and I can feel my thoughts slipping away, replaced by the relentless urge to consume and destroy. Blind to good reasoning, to the warnings that my own mind tried to give me. And now it is too late. This is judgment, not just on me, but on all of us. We were so eager to accept a miracle, so desperate for salvation. Now we failed to see the curse that came with it. And now we are paying the ultimate price. I'm dying now. In these final moments of lucidity, my body is giving out, unable to sustain the monstrous form it has taken. The wings that once felt powerful now hang limp and useless, and the hunger that once drove me is fading into a cold, empty void. I still wonder if, had I not chosen to eat those new crops, would I be near death now? Would I have escaped the curse that has befallen us all? But these questions are futile, for the end is inevitable, and there is no going back. As I lie here, waiting for the darkness to take me, I can't help but pity those poor people in the neighboring farm. I hope they are God-fearing people, and that they will find a way to survive what is coming for them. My name is Amos, and this was my solemn testimony. I was a man once, but now I am something else entirely. And soon, I will be nothing at all.